Every year, the United States federal government spends roughly $3.5 trillion. To put that in perspective, if you spent $1 million every single day, it would take you nearly 10,000 years to reach that total. It hasn't always been this enormous. In 1933, the entire annual federal budget was about $4.5 billion, a sum that wouldn't even cover a single day of today's government operations. Managing that level of wealth requires a unified economic plan. But in a two-party system, creating a single strategy is notoriously difficult because our government is managed by people with deeply differing views on how active the state should be. These ideologies often pull in opposite directions. Conservatives generally prioritize economic freedom and less regulation, while liberals often believe the government has a responsibility to protect workers and consumers through more active oversight. This means the federal budget isn't just a spreadsheet. It's a multi-billion-dollar battleground where these opposing visions of America are forced to find a way to coexist. This massive financial planning process doesn't start in a boardroom. It begins inside the executive branch. Every federal department submits its spending goals to the Office of Management and Budget. This central agency synthesizes those individual wish lists into one cohesive proposal that reflects the president's specific priorities. The administration presents this initial draft as an opening bid in a high-stakes negotiation. It functions as an ideological blueprint, detailing which programs the president intends to expand and which they believe should be scaled back to meet their economic goals. The process follows a strict timeline. Every February, the president officially sends this massive proposal and a formal budget message to Congress, handing over the next phase of the plan. But the president can only suggest how to spend the money. This handoff to Congress marks the start of a process where that vision is systematically scrutinized, revised, and often rewritten by the committees that hold the nation's purse strings. Under Article 1 of the Constitution, the ultimate power shifts here. Only Congress has the legal authority to authorize federal spending and raise revenue. Lawmakers don't just take the president's word for it. They use the Congressional Budget Office, their own independent team of analysts, to double-check the administration's math and project the long-term impact of the proposal. The unified plan is then broken apart. Separate House and Senate committees hold their own hearings, calling in executive officials to defend their requests before the committees write their own versions of the budget. Because these two versions rarely match, a special committee must reconcile the differences, merging the competing House and Senate plans into a single adopted budget resolution. This design is a deliberate feature of the American system. It's a framework engineered by the Constitution to create friction, ensuring that no single ideology can control the national economy without intense debate. However, the system has a critical timing flaw. While the president must submit a budget by February, Congress faces no legally enforced deadline to actually pass one. When deadlines are missed, lawmakers often rely on continuing resolutions. These temporary measures extend the previous year's funding levels, essentially buying time to keep the government running while negotiations continue. If compromise fails and funding stops, the system enters a forced breakdown. Non-essential federal offices, programs, and museums are shuttered as money runs dry. We have seen the consequences of these standoffs before. In 1995, 1996, and 2013, gridlock led to damaging shutdowns that lasted for weeks, forcing federal workers to stay home and national parks to close their gates. These moments, along with forced cuts called sequestration, are the leverage points used when the machinery of political compromise entirely fails. After the legislative battle is over and the funding is finally approved, we have to look at the results. Where does that $3.5 trillion actually go? Before a single debate begins on the House floor, the vast majority of federal revenue is already committed to specific destinations. Modern lawmakers are working within a much narrower financial window than the public rhetoric often suggests. This chart shows how the budget is distributed. Notice that roughly 70% of all spending is classified as uncontrollables. These are expenditures required by law or previous commitments that cannot be changed in a typical budget cycle. This massive slice is dominated by entitlements, benefits that Congress is legally required to provide to individuals. This includes the pension systems for retired workers, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, which alone accounted for over $770 billion in 2012. This clock tracks the other major uncontrollable expense, the interest on our national debt. As the government borrows more to cover yearly deficits, the cost of simply paying the interest on that accumulated history of debt continues to expand. The reality of modern budgeting is that the vast majority of today's tax revenue is already locked away, paying for the legislative promises and financial debts of previous generations. That leaves discretionary spending, the remaining 30% of the pie. This is the only area where Congress can actually exercise its judgment and make new choices for the year. A massive portion of this discretionary slice goes toward national defense. This funds the military operations, the weapons systems, and the personnel required to defend the United States. Everything else must compete for the remaining scraps. Infrastructure repairs, environmental protection, criminal justice, and school lunch programs all survive on what's left of this narrowing 30%. This creates a looming mathematical crisis.